I'm Andrew Lee. I'm an associate professor of journalism at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles.
But now based in China?
No, I was based in China. I was based in Beijing for the last 3 years, but I just moved to the US in August of 2009 to take up a full-time teaching position at the University of Southern California.
Now, you've studied Wikipedia more than most.
Yes.
How is Wikipedia doing? Because, I mean, if you look at the statistics, has it passed its peak?
There is some argument that Wikipedia may be hitting some rocky road. So if you look back into the history of Wikipedia, which started in 2001, it's been on a pretty strong growth curve since that time when it started. So it's been what looks like exponential growth since 2001, but in 2007 they start to see a big slowdown in terms of how many people were joining the community of editors, how many articles were being created per day, and that continues to this day. So it's steadily declined in terms of how many people are participating, even though the numbers of articles are still growing. And that might be for a number of reasons. It might be that the community is getting smaller because there are fewer people to edit, but it might just simply be because with over 3 million articles in the English language Wikipedia, most of the basic subjects have been written about, and that next article you add to Wikipedia is that much tougher because it requires more expertise to edit that.
Is it a trusted source for journalists?
I think it's a trusted starting point for journalists, and I think that's where I always tell journalists there's no better starting point than Wikipedia, but probably no worse ending point than Wikipedia. So just make sure that when you use it, you understand what it is about and go to those original sources for the ultimate reference.
Is it vulnerable in the sense that it's quite a small core of people who actually run it, isn't it?
Right, I think it is vulnerable. So I think long term, if you don't have a body of editors or people to maintain Wikipedia, you might have the infiltration, and you're already seeing this in some ways, of public relations companies or entities trying to influence their articles in subtle ways and maybe not so subtle ways, that the long-term trajectory may be more worrying in terms of the reliability and the balance of these articles.
Andrew Lee thinks the relationships between bloggers, journalists and the public are evolving into various relationships.
Right. I think for too long we've been looking at this a little bit too simplistically as saying, are bloggers journalists? Or, do we expect for citizens to do all the job of journalists, and isn't there a crisis now in the industry? And I tried to give a more nuanced view, saying that there are things that the crowd or the audience does well, and there are things that journalists do well. And going forward, I see it as a more complex and fruitful relationship between journalists and citizens. So citizens out in the field are the ones who have very local knowledge about stuff, right? So they're the ones who know what the grocery prices are on their block, or whether there's a danger in their area, and they can report that back to journalists who can curate that process. On the other hand, you have sometimes the opposite, where journalists have access to information, but they don't have the manpower or the person power to look through hundreds and thousands of documents, and they can call on the public to help in sifting through the mounds and mounds of papers and to find out what's interesting, and then the journalists can take the results of that and move forward with it. So I think there's a really a complex partnership that can happen between the citizenry and the journalist class, and it's a really interesting one. And it's not as simple as saying, one's going to take over the other or one is absolutely needed. There's really great situations where one party plays better than the other.